Good evening, friends, colleagues, and fellow observers of this ever evolving economic drama we call global capitalism. Today, I want to talk about an issue that once again reminds us that trade wars, much like real wars, rarely have clean victories, only deepening consequences. The headlines read Trump trade war strikes back after Crown Royal leaves Canada. A catchy phrase, perhaps, but behind it lies a serious story about economic nationalism, corporate greed, and the illusion that nations can isolate themselves from the global web of production and profit. Crown Royal's sudden exit from Canada has not just rattled the shelves of whiskey lovers, it has rattled the very foundations of North American trade politics. What was once seen as an unshakable Canadian icon, a brand deeply woven into the country's cultural and economic identity, is now at the center of a storm fueled by tariffs, political posturing, and corporate maneuvering. The move has sparked questions about the true cost of economic nationalism and the lasting impact of the Trump era trade wars that continue to reverberate through global markets. This development isn't simply about a company relocating operations, it's a symptom of a much deeper problem in the economic bloodstream of North America. For decades, Crown Royal has stood as a symbol of Canadian craftsmanship and stability. Its departure signifies more than the loss of jobs. It's a sign of the shifting global order where even legacy industries are no longer anchored by tradition, geography, or national pride. In the wake of rising trade tensions, this departure exposes how vulnerable national economies have become to corporate decisions driven purely by profit calculations, not patriotism. Observers note that the timing of Crown Royal's decision is hardly accidental. With trade frictions resurfacing under the renewed America First rhetoric, many companies are finding themselves cornered by tariffs, supply chain constraints, and retaliatory trade policies. What we are witnessing is the boomerang effect of protectionism, policies designed to secure domestic industries now pushing them to relocate abroad in search of cheaper operations and friendlier trade conditions. The irony, of course, is striking. In the attempt to protect national production, governments often end up accelerating its flight. Economist Professor Richard D. Wolff, known for his sharp critiques of capitalist contradictions, points out that the Crown Royal case exemplifies the failure of trade wars to serve the working class. When you pit nations against one another in an economic tug of war, Wolff argues, you create a battlefield where corporations win and workers lose. He highlights how such policies give multinational corporations the upper hand, allowing them to exploit divisions between governments while chasing lower costs across borders. In his view, Crown Royal's exit is not a betrayal of Canada, but a predictable consequence of an economic system where capital has no homeland. The shockwaves extend far beyond the whiskey industry. Analysts warn that Crown Royal's withdrawal could trigger a domino effect, with other manufacturers rethinking their Canadian operations in anticipation of unstable trade conditions. Small towns that rely on production plants and supply chain jobs are bracing for layoffs while political leaders scramble to contain the fallout. Consumer markets are expected to feel the sting next as tariffs and logistical disruptions drive up prices and limit product availability. This single corporate move underscores a profound truth about today's political economy. Nationalism cannot contain capitalism. The global marketplace has erased borders for corporations, but not for workers, who remain confined by policies, wages, and economic vulnerability. As Crown Royal exits Canada, it leaves behind more than empty warehouses. It leaves a cautionary tale about the dangers of waging trade wars in an era when money moves faster than morality. In the end, the shock is not just economic, it's existential. When a brand as deeply Canadian as Crown Royal no longer finds it viable to operate within its homeland, it forces us to confront a hard question. Who truly benefits from trade wars and who pays the price? For now, the answer seems as clear as the whiskey itself. Workers, consumers, and communities are left holding the bottle, while corporations toast to profit across the border. Trump's trade war policies are roaring back into the political spotlight, reigniting tensions that many economists had hoped were finally cooling. Once dismissed as a political experiment or a populist stunt, these policies are now reemerging as a cornerstone of the renewed nationalist economic agenda. The phrase America First is echoing once again through campaign rallies and political debates, sending a familiar tremor through global markets and rekindling fears of another round of retaliatory tariffs, disrupted supply chains, and international uncertainty. What was once an aggressive maneuver to challenge China and recalibrate U.S. trade relations is now being repackaged as a patriotic crusade to reclaim American jobs, a promise that remains as controversial as ever. The trade war strategy, at its core, was designed to position the United States as an economic fortress capable of producing, consuming, and thriving independently of global dependence. It appealed to a working class frustration built on decades of industrial decline, factory closures, and the outsourcing of blue-collar jobs. Yet the reality behind the rhetoric proved more complex. Tariffs, rather than bringing manufacturing home, often raised costs for domestic producers, hurt exporters, and led to price hikes that rippled through the economy. The renewed talk of trade barriers has already caused concern among economists who warn that a repeat of those mistakes could destabilize fragile recovery efforts in both North America and beyond. The revival of these policies has taken on a distinctly political tone. In an age where populism sells, protectionist messaging has become a powerful campaign tool. Trump and his allies frame the trade war as a heroic stand against globalization's excesses, an economic revolution to restore dignity to the American worker. But beneath the slogans lies an uncomfortable truth. The first trade war, far from restoring industrial might, left a trail of collateral damage. Farmers faced retaliatory tariffs, small manufacturers struggled under inflated costs, and trading partners like Canada, Mexico, and China retaliated with economic measures of their own. The result was not a rebirth of American manufacturing, but a reshuffling of global production lines as companies shifted operations to avoid the crossfire. Economist Professor Richard D. Wolff has been one of the most vocal critics of this renewed trade war narrative. He warns that the return of these policies reflects a deeper misunderstanding of how modern capitalism functions. You cannot wage war on trade in a world where corporations themselves are global, Wolff explains. The same corporations that benefit from tariffs on one border are exploiting loopholes on another. It's not a national strategy, it's a corporate game played on a planetary scale. His words strike at the heart of the issue. While politicians campaign on economic nationalism, multinational corporations continue to manipulate trade laws, taxes, and tariffs to their advantage, leaving workers trapped in a cycle of rising costs and vanishing opportunities. The global response has been swift and uneasy. Trading partners are already signaling that any new U.S. tariffs will be met with swift retaliation. Financial analysts are warning investors to prepare for volatility in sectors ranging from agriculture to technology. Meanwhile, everyday consumers brace for the inevitable, the slow, creeping rise in prices that always follows political attempts to manipulate trade dynamics. In the end, the reemergence of Trump's trade war policies feels less like a bold new strategy and more like an old fire being stoked for political theater. It taps into deep national anxieties about lost industries, disappearing jobs, and foreign competition, while offering little in the way of sustainable solutions. The hooks of nationalism may stir applause at rallies, but in boardrooms and marketplaces, the calculations remain coldly capitalist. As the rhetoric heats up once again, the world watches closely, knowing that when economic nationalism makes a comeback, the first casualties are rarely politicians. They're workers, consumers, and the fragile balance of global trade itself. Professor Richard D. Wolff has never been one to mince words, and in his latest remarks on Crown Royal's departure from Canada, his message cuts straight to the heart of the matter. The culprit isn't patriotism gone wrong, it's corporate greed running wild. With the precision of an economist and the passion of a moral critic, Wolff exposes the illusion that multinational corporations act out of loyalty to any nation. In his view, these corporations don't carry flags, they carry balance sheets. Their decisions aren't shaped by borders or national interests, but by profit margins and shareholder demands. When Crown Royal decided to leave its home soil, it wasn't a matter of pride or policy. It was a calculation, pure and simple. Wolff's critique goes beyond the specifics of one company. It's an indictment of a system that rewards the relentless pursuit of profit at the expense of people. He argues that in today's globalized economy, the rhetoric of patriotism has become a convenient mask for corporate opportunism. Politicians speak of protecting national industries and our workers, but the corporations they defend have long since detached themselves from national loyalty. They operate wherever labor is cheapest, taxes are lightest, and regulations are weakest. As Wolff notes, capital has no country, it only has interests. This is the uncomfortable truth at the core of his argument. When corporations make decisions, they are not defending economic sovereignty, they are exploiting it. His analysis hits particularly hard in the context of the renewed America First trade rhetoric. Wolff warns that this language, while emotionally appealing, obscures the real power dynamics at play. It encourages workers to see themselves in competition with one another, American versus Canadian, Chinese versus Mexican, when in fact the real contest is between labor and capital. He emphasizes that the trade wars, tariff battles, and corporate relocations are all symptoms of a system that prioritizes capital accumulation above all else. These companies don't move because of patriotism or politics, he insists. They move because that's where profit takes them. What makes Wolff's message so compelling is not just his economic insight, but his ability to reveal the moral emptiness behind corporate decisions that devastate communities. He paints a vivid picture of towns hollowed out by plant closures, workers left jobless after decades of service, and governments scrambling to explain why the companies they subsidized have abandoned them overnight. Each corporate move, he argues, is a quiet betrayal, a reminder that the invisible hand of the market often strikes hardest where people can least afford it. Wolff's framing transforms what could be dismissed as just another business story into a broader critique of capitalism's moral compass. He challenges the narrative that corporations act in the national interest or that their success naturally benefits society. They wrap themselves in flags, he says, but the only banner they truly follow is the dollar. It's a statement that resonates in an age of deepening inequality and corporate dominance. In the unfolding drama of Crown Royal's exit, Wolff's voice cuts through the noise with clarity and conviction. He reminds audiences that the real divide is not between nations, but between those who control production and those who depend on it. His warning is both economic and ethical. Until society reclaims control over how and why production decisions are made, corporate greed, not patriotism, will continue to dictate the fate of workers, communities, and economies around the world. His words serve as both a critique and a call to consciousness, urging us to look beyond the rhetoric and confront the real engine driving today's global disruptions, the unrelenting pursuit of profit over people. In every trade war, amid the noise of political speeches and corporate press releases, there is one constant casualty: the workers. They are the ones caught in the crossfire of policies made in boardrooms and government offices, their livelihoods treated as collateral damage in a battle over tariffs, profit margins, and national pride. As Crown Royal's exit from Canada demonstrates, when corporations shift production or when governments impose tariffs in the name of protecting domestic industries, it's rarely the executives or politicians who pay the price. It's the people on the factory floors, the truck drivers, the warehouse clerks, and the small businesses that rely on stable trade flows. Their labor builds the economy, but when economic storms hit, they are the first to lose their footing. Economist Professor Richard D. Wolff captures this tragedy with remarkable clarity. He argues that workers have become pawns in a global economic chess game, sacrificed whenever powerful players, corporations, or governments decide to make a move. In his view, trade wars are never truly about protecting workers. They are about redistributing profit and power within a global capitalist system that places labor at the bottom of the hierarchy. When trade wars begin, Wolff notes, workers are promised protection, but what they receive instead are layoffs, wage cuts, and rising prices. His analysis reveals a cruel paradox. The very policies sold as shields for workers often become the swords that cut their economic security. The story of Crown Royal's withdrawal is a perfect case in point. In the wake of new trade tensions, tariffs have driven up production costs, and corporations like Crown Royal are seeking cheaper alternatives abroad. For the workers left behind, this means unemployment, dwindling local economies, and communities struggling to stay alive. Factories that once anchored small towns now stand silent, while local shops and restaurants that depended on those paychecks face closure. The human cost is not just economic, it's emotional. Families face uncertainty, pride in one's work turns to anxiety, and the promise of stability that once defined the middle class begins to erode. At the same time, Wolff draws attention to the illusion of choice presented to workers in these scenarios. Politicians tell them they must choose between globalization and nationalism, between foreign competition and domestic protectionism. But in reality, neither path serves their long-term interests. Under globalization, jobs are outsourced in the pursuit of cheaper labor. Under protectionism, corporations pass the cost of tariffs onto consumers and relocate production when it suits their profit margins. It's not a war between nations, Wolff reminds us. It's a war between classes. The battlefield may be international trade, but the victims are the same in every country, those who depend on wages, not wealth, to survive. This crisis of the working class goes beyond numbers and policies. It reflects a moral and structural failure. Governments champion economic victories measured by corporate profits and stock market gains, while ignoring the erosion of job quality, wage stagnation, and worker dignity. The reality, as Wolff underscores, is that workers are being squeezed from both ends, exploited by corporate cost-cutting on one side and manipulated by nationalist rhetoric on the other. Their sacrifices are dressed up as patriotic duty, yet their rewards are meager or non-existent. The hooks of this narrative lie in its human element. Every statistic hides a story. A worker laid off after 20 years of service, a community center shuttered for lack of funding, a generation growing up with fewer opportunities than the one before. These are not side effects of economic policy, they are its direct consequences. As trade wars reignite and corporations continue to chase profit across borders, the world is once again reminded that workers are the ones who bear the real cost of political ambition and corporate greed. They stand on the front lines of an economic conflict they never chose, fighting to hold on to the one thing both sides claim to defend, the dignity of work itself. Trade wars, once wielded as a tool of national strength, have become an outdated weapon in a globalized economy that no longer recognizes the boundaries of nations in the way it once did. The reemergence of tariff battles, protectionist rhetoric, and economic nationalism reflects a dangerous misunderstanding of how deeply intertwined the modern world's production systems have become. Every smartphone assembled, every car manufactured, and every bottle of whiskey exported is the result of a vast and delicate network that crosses dozens of borders. When a government imposes tariffs to punish another, it's not striking an enemy. It's striking its own economy, its own consumers, and most importantly, its own workers. The illusion of control that trade wars offer is powerful, but it is also profoundly misleading. Professor Richard D. Wolff captures this contradiction with his signature clarity, calling trade wars political theater for economic pain. He argues that in an era where corporations operate across continents and ownership structures span the globe, no country can isolate its economy from the consequences of its actions. When tariffs rise, companies don't suddenly become patriotic. They adapt. They move production to new countries, find tax havens, or pass the costs on to consumers. The result is a vicious cycle in which working people, not corporations, shoulder the burden. You can't win a trade war, Wolff often says, when your own companies are fighting on both sides of it. The essence of globalization is interdependence, yet political leaders continue to act as if economies can be detached and rebuilt behind protective walls. The case of Crown Royal leaving Canada exemplifies this modern paradox. In trying to shield local industries from foreign competition, new trade restrictions made production more expensive, prompting the very outcome they sought to prevent: the flight of business. It's a story that has repeated across industries and continents. Factories moving to cheaper regions, supply chains rerouted, workers displaced, and consumers paying higher prices. In the global economy, there are no isolated victories. Every tariff imposed sends shockwaves through an intricate web of suppliers, distributors, and markets. Wolff points out that the architecture of capitalism itself has evolved beyond the reach of any single government. Corporations have mastered the art of arbitrage, shifting capital, labor, and production to wherever the conditions are most favorable. Meanwhile, governments are left fighting economic battles with 20th century weapons in a 21st century world. The trade war narrative sells well politically because it appeals to national pride and nostalgia, but it fails economically because the system it targets no longer functions within national boundaries. It's like trying to build a dam in the ocean, Wolff remarks. The tides of global capital will always find a way around it. The real hook in this discussion lies in the irony of its consequences. Trade wars are promoted as a means to strengthen domestic economies, yet they often end up weakening them. The moment tariffs are raised, production costs climb, exports decline, and retaliatory tariffs strike back. Farmers lose markets, manufacturers face shortages, and consumers confront rising prices at the checkout counter. The supposed war between nations quickly becomes a war within them. between political promises and economic realities. Globalization, for all its flaws, has created a system too interconnected to be fought with isolationist tools. Wolff's analysis drives home that the failure of trade wars is not just economic, it's conceptual. The idea that any nation can unilaterally control its economic destiny through tariffs and trade restrictions ignores the fundamental truth of our time. Capitalism has outgrown the nation state. The challenge is no longer to win trade wars, but to rethink how nations can cooperate, regulate, and restructure a global economy that serves people, not just profits. In a world where goods, data, and capital move faster than borders can contain them, the weapons of the past have lost their power. Trade wars don't build strength, they expose weakness in a system that can no longer be managed by old ideas. In the wake of mounting trade tensions and corporate maneuvering, Professor Richard D. Wolff issues a powerful call, not for retaliation, but for transformation. His message cuts through the noise of political grandstanding and economic finger-pointing. Trade wars, tariffs, and nationalist policies are mere distractions from the deeper problem embedded within our economic structure. The issue is not which country wins or loses. It's that the rules of the game are written to ensure that ordinary people lose no matter the outcome. Wolff's appeal is both pragmatic and visionary. He argues that instead of fighting endless cycles of retaliation, nations must rethink the very foundation of their economies and embrace democratic, cooperative systems that prioritize human need over corporate greed. Wolff's argument begins with a simple but piercing observation. Retaliation in trade conflicts achieves nothing but escalation. When one nation imposes tariffs, another responds, and soon the world finds itself in a downward spiral of protectionism, inflation, and economic instability. It's a pattern that benefits politicians seeking short-term applause and corporations skilled at exploiting chaos, but it leaves workers, small businesses, and consumers trapped in uncertainty. You don't fix a broken system by breaking it further, Wolff insists. Instead, he advocates for an economic transformation that redistributes power from the few who own and control production to the many who actually make production possible. This transformation, Wolff argues, must begin with democratizing the workplace itself. The global economy cannot be stabilized as long as the majority of people remain excluded from decision-making within the institutions that shape their lives. He envisions worker cooperatives, businesses owned and operated by employees, as a model for sustainable economic development. In such systems, decisions about production, pricing, and expansion are made collectively, ensuring that profits are reinvested into communities rather than siphoned off to remote shareholders. It's not merely an economic adjustment, it's a redefinition of what economic success means. The power of Wolff's message lies in its clarity and urgency. He doesn't frame transformation as an abstract ideal, but as a necessary response to a collapsing economic narrative. For decades, governments have promised that competition and deregulation would lift all boats, yet the tides have only lifted yachts. The recurring trade wars are proof that the current model, rooted in profit maximization and global exploitation, cannot deliver lasting stability or equity. Retaliation keeps us trapped in the old logic of domination, Wolff says. Transformation opens the path to cooperation. His words strike at a moral and intellectual crossroads. Either continue reacting to crises created by capitalism or build a new system that prevents them altogether. What makes this call so compelling is that it resonates across borders. Whether it's a factory worker in Canada, a farmer in the US, or a small manufacturer in China, the struggle is the same. The concentration of wealth and decision-making in the hands of a few has left millions vulnerable to economic shocks they did not cause. Wolff's proposal is not anti-trade or anti-globalization, it is pro-human. He envisions a world where international trade serves mutual benefit rather than competitive dominance, where nations collaborate on labor standards, environmental protection, and social welfare instead of waging tariff wars that destroy them all. The hook in Wolff's message lies in its reversal of the political script. While leaders promise to fight back with tariffs and threats, he offers something far more radical: the courage to stop fighting and start rebuilding. Economic retaliation satisfies anger, but transformation heals it. It creates an economy where people no longer fear the next corporate exit, the next round of layoffs, or the next trade dispute. Wolff's call challenges us to imagine an alternative, to step beyond the reactive politics of resentment and toward an economy grounded in cooperation, democracy, and shared prosperity. It is, as he frames it, not just an economic demand, but a moral awakening. The time has come to stop waging wars and start building systems that work for everyone.